we are in danger of religious freedom into religious privilege.
Those who want to limit religious freedom are using new legislation to force religious compliance to their desires.
The American Religious Town Hall is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
I'm James Weingardner, sitting in for Jerry Lutz. We're glad that you've tuned in. We have an important topic with some esteemed commentators, and let's introduce our commentators today. We'll let them introduce themselves, and we'll begin with Tony.
Hi, I'm Tony Matthews, and I'm the senior pastor at North Garland Baptist Fellowship in Garland, Texas.
Hi, I'm Carl Trovall. I'm professor of ethics and history at Concordia University in Austin, Texas.
I'm Tom Plumley. I'm a minister in the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. I serve as senior minister at First Christian Church, Fort Worth, Texas.
My name is John Peterson. I am a priest in the Episcopal Church, canonically resident in the Diocese of Washington.
A recent article in The Atlantic argued that the U.S. Supreme Court is out of step with recent social and demographic changes. People are less religious than they once were, and according to Rachel Laser, CEO of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, religious institutions and individuals are attempting to dial back social progress, and recent court decisions are enabling them. The religious intent seems to be to exempt religious institutions from obeying laws guaranteeing equality. The author identifies the enemy as conservative white Christians, noting that only 40% of the U.S. population is now white and Christian. There's another 25% who are black Christians, many of whom share some of the same values as the 40%, though they are not figured in the author's argument, which suggests that the minority is ruling the majority even on the Supreme Court in its conservative majority. Given this opening statement, we'd like our panelists to consider the following questions. Number one, does or does not the free exercise clause of the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution suggest that religious institutions are free to exercise their religious beliefs and practices without the state imposing limits on their beliefs and practices? Two, should the majority of Americans who practice their religious faith be required to submit to all laws representing minority positions, even when these laws violate their free exercise of faith communities? And three, what about the religious needs versus religious preferences? How do we distinguish between the two? Our conversation today will begin with John.
Thank you so very much. This is a very important subject to be discussing, and it is one that our society is really dealing with today with regard to religious liberty and how religious liberty is expressed. What is religious liberty? And is religious liberty religious privilege? A tough one. There was an article in The Atlantic, which I highly recommend everyone reading, which discussed the Supreme Court decision in November overturning New York State's limits on religious gatherings during the COVID-19 pandemic. The ruling continued the conservative majority and sustained drive to provide religious organizations more leeway in their exemptions from civil law and from on the grounds of protecting religious liberty. These cases have been top priority in the court recently, usually led by white Christians and sometimes joined by other religious traditions. In the case of New York, by the Jewish synagogue allied with the Brooklyn Diocese of of New York and Brooklyn to oppose the New York's restrictions on religious services. In other words, the Jews and Christians came together on this one subject here to bring it to the Supreme Court. I've seen the ramifications of that decision, giving the church, the synagogue, the mosque leeway in contrast to other institutions in our life. And that actually played home in my hometown of Hendersonville, North Carolina, where we have a perfect example of exactly the impact of that Supreme Court decision of giving the church leeway. The First Baptist Church in Hendersonville, downtown Hendersonville, and Hendersonville is a community of 15,000 people, did not go, and like most churches did, go online and Zoom. Instead, they continued to have online services, in-person services. But the real issue came when they had a holiday-themed event for Christmas on the weekend of December 5th. The Christmas musical involved crowds of maskless churchgoers and choir members who were singing shoulder to shoulder without their masks. And this is to quote the local paper of how they reported it. The Henderson County Department of Health, Public Health, reported that as a result of this leeway, as a result of relaxing regulations of masks and standing close, social distancing, etc., 98 people were infected with the coronavirus. Had the Supreme Court not made that decision, most likely given that leeway, most likely there would have been 98 less people infected with the coronavirus. While the Baptist Church in Hendersonville then ceased all in-person services for a month, services have now resumed, but people now have to wear their mask when they attend church.
Thank you, John. Tony?
Yes, interesting topic, one that's certainly needed to discuss. And when it comes to, as Ken and John mentioned, with the pandemic and churches gathering, I can understand, at the height of the pandemic, it seems like this was a public emergency. And I think that religious institutions should be examples and be good neighbors and to do everything that it can to help the public. And I think when the pandemic started, for me personally, when I saw churches gathering, when all the science and the officials were saying, hey, this could be a dangerous thing, I thought that, we should probably not gather or at least take the appropriate measurements to distance and wear a mask. And I think that, for me, that was kind of an easy decision. When I read the moderator's statement here that the religious intent seems to be to exempt religious institutions from obeying laws guaranteeing equality. So I'm going to just take it into a different area now, because I think that there are laws out there that's getting ready to be implemented that can kind of hurt religious institutions. One such law is the Equality Act. On one show I mentioned that, as preachers, you can't sink with the booze or rise with the applause, and I probably won't get a lot of applause on this one, which is okay. But I think that that is one law that's coming down the pike that I think will hurt religious institutions. The question, should the majority of Americans practice their religious faith be required to submit to all these laws? I think this is an example that, I don't think religious institutions should, because For example, one article, and by the way, let me say what's interesting. I saw a program that was put on by a religious organization that titled it "The Inequality of the Equality Act," and it talked, and the panelists were LGBTQ and feminists, and these people were basically speaking out against the Equality Act, saying that it's going to hurt women and girls, and I think when a law like that is passed, and from a state perspective, I read that in Massachusetts, that a law was passed there in Massachusetts that would force churches to abandon biblical teachings on sexuality, and then having the space accommodation for biological males, where they could also have the same or share the same space as women. And so I think when you take away the voice of the church, and I understand there are some churches that don't have a problem with that, but there are a lot of churches that still say, hey, we need to not have biological males meeting in the same restroom with women. And so I think this is going to be very problematic. And I also think that having the feminists and LGBTQ people speaking out against this, I think, and I mean speaking out strongly against it, and they're sounding the alarm that this is going to hurt women and girls. Where does the church, stand? Do you take away their 501c3 or their tax exempt status? Do you fine churches? So I think this is what when I read this, and having laws made that can kind of force religious compliance, I think the Equality Act may be one of them. And I guess time will tell, but I think it's and I'll say something later on about the church's response to this, because I do think that when there are laws made that fly in the face of Scripture, based on how certain churches interpret Scripture, you don't go off of the polls or how demographics change. You kind of stick with the word. So,
thank you, Carl.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question, Tony. You mentioned that the argument was that it hurts women and girls, and so what was the argument being made?
Yeah, the argument was being made that, for instance, if you have a transgendered person who is, goes from male to female, that biological male can compete with girl sports. And the argument is, that was one argument. And also another argument is if a church has, and I think this is the case in Massachusetts, if a church has a spaghetti dinner, that's held at the church, that these biological males, even if they feel like, that they're women, can share the restroom. And the case I read in Massachusetts basically states that the public accommodation laws would have to be implemented by those churches. So I think those were a couple of examples of this challenge.
Okay. Obviously, none of our rights are absolute. I think that's where I'm going to start on this. Religious freedom has its limits. I mean, the Supreme Court decided against polygamy many years ago, when the Mormon Church, in the name of religious freedom, practiced polygamy, and the United States said, the Supreme Court said no. Right? And spousal abuse, the belief that the family is sacred and that the government shouldn't interfere, and that if a woman's abused in her own home, that's the church's business and not the state's business, or child abuse also, and to me, I think the piece that we need to ask here is, I think that when human beings are being harmed, the first principle is do no harm. that when people are being physically harmed, that's problematic. And for me, if I were in a church and I'm interested, let's just make the assumption that in my church, it's traditional church, evangelical, Roman Catholic, who have a particular position on gay relationships, opposition to gay marriage, and transgender issues as well. Let's say that someone comes to worship in your facility, and they're struggling, and they're in pain. And then they need to go to the bathroom. To me, I don't think that I think that the government is there to make sure that that person has a place to go, even if they're just there struggling. I mean, I think it's a part of ministry that you would provide that for people, even though you may disagree with who they are and what they're doing, that it's still an obligation to provide restroom facilities for every human being in your place. So, I mean, to me, I think the do no harm piece is the central issue. And religions don't have the right to harm people. They don't.
I mean, okay, I'm sorry. I know we have other.
I mean,
panelists.
the one thing is I don't. You know, the Equality Act is it well written? I mean, there's all that question too.
But quick question: if you said do no harm, what about a female who is not transgendered and a biological male goes in there? Is it harmful to that female? I mean, you have to have both sides.
Well, so at Concordia, we have restrooms that are single restrooms, right? And people can go in and it's completely private.
Definitely the future.
Yeah, I think that's...
Yeah.
Tom?
I think the problem that's being pointed up here, regardless of what we think about the Equality Act itself, putting that aside, the problem that's being pointed up here and the problem that Rachel Laser is pointing up on behalf of as spokesperson for Americans United, and I'm one of the national leaders of Americans United, is that there has been a general swing of the pendulum far in the direction of free exercise, to the point that we have seen the establishment of a certain kind of religion as the preferred religion. And so the free exercise clause needs to be exercised more in order to bring that pendulum back. And here we're talking about the attempt to destroy the Johnson Amendment, which says that churches can't be political organizations. The vast majority of our faith groups do not do that anyway. We're talking about the attempt to undermine the Affordable Care Act by denying women access to contraception on religious grounds. In other words, choosing the religious ground, the religious opinion of the employer, rather than giving the woman the right to exercise her understanding of her faith, and then also all the LGBTQ stuff that you mentioned when you started talking about the Equality Act has swung the general stacking of the Supreme Court. With all justices of a particular religious mindset, the general pandering to Christian nationalism, which has been a part of what we've seen in the past 4.5 years in this country. We've got to swing that pendulum back in the other direction and recognize that we cannot establish Christian evangelicalism as the preferred religion in America. It is simply against our Constitution. It is not healthy for religion, and it is against the gospel, frankly.
All right. Thank you all very much. We'll be back in just a minute after this break.
We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall Estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you and today's closing statements.
Welcome back. We have a unique and interesting program today that's have some loving disagreement among us, and so let's continue the disagreement with our summations. Tony.
Yes. I want to say to the public that it's one reason why I love being a part of the American Religious Town Hall is that we can disagree and still love each other. And I think what you have seen is an example of how Americans should behave. You can have different opinions, and I certainly thank the Lord for our colleagues. Real quickly, I'd like to say that there comes a time for civil disobedience. In Scripture, when the Pharaoh ordered the drowning of the Hebrew boys, that law, if you will, was disobeyed. And based on the convictions of particular churches, if laws are made that contradict your biblical beliefs, I see no reason why civil disobedience should not take place. Another example would be Peter and John when they were told not to preach the gospel, and they said, "We rather obey God than men." The dilemma is you have Christians who have various views. And I think that's where we come together as Christians and kind of, see how we understand and interpret various passages.
Tom?
Thank you. I just once again want to speak of that pendulum that has swung too far toward free exercise and to the point that we have established a religion. I really admire and respect all of our panelists, particularly those that I disagree with, because that's the nature of this program and the nature of our enterprise. I frankly don't understand the biblical problem with how people create a biblical problem for transgenderism, which is not discussed anywhere in Christian scriptures. Now you can pick a few things about homosexuality, and we can argue that, but for a person who understands themselves to be different than their genitalia indicates, that's just something that the church has to struggle with, and for the church to begin the struggle with making those people feel bad and not providing accommodation for them, that's not anywhere to go. I just don't see how that's helpful. That's not going to help us begin the conversation.
John?
Dear Tony, I think what we did in our two statements today really gave two very radically different examples.
Sure.
And you took one example which I would consider to be extreme, but you perhaps would not. And I took one that dealt with a present contemporary situation in relationship to COVID. And I want to say that in relationship to COVID, I think that and distancing and things like that, masks have become a political issue in many places. And yet, at the same time, we see in those places huge spikes always in the COVID spreading going on. In North Carolina, since the Supreme Court has dealt with the issues of same-gender bathrooms, etc., we now, most places, restaurants, etc., have a unisex private bathroom. And one restaurant that we go to had two toilets right next to each other, bathrooms right next to each other, one for male and one for female. And now the label on that bathroom is both male, female, male, female. So anyone can go in to either bathroom now instead of the male toilet and the female toilet. So I think that, the issue here, is being certainly worked out and struggled in the courts, et cetera, of how to deal with these situations. I think, though, that the purpose of the program today was to deal with what Rachel Laser speaks about of religious freedom and religious privilege. And I certainly here want to say that I think that the rulings that have come down from the Supreme Court recently have certainly indicated a privilege, religious privilege, instead of simply religious freedom for many different church groups. So that's what I have to say.
Thanks, John. Carl, you get the last word.
Yeah, well, that's funny.
The last brief word.
Well, but, I mean, I will say this, is that because we've thrown out so many examples, right? I think that just illustrates how complicated this is, and that I think it's about individual issues. Because to me, let's just take Mass and church gatherings. I mean, if you're giving businesses greater privileges than churches, then that's a problem to me. But if they're equal, that's a different issue, right? So I think it's contextual, and we need to look at it case by case.
Thank you all for your comments. This is an exciting show when we have an opportunity to disagree. The Charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America, we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. Now, friends, till next week at the same time and over the same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. May the God of all of us bless all of you.